In the ancient sagas of how men become monsters, there is usually the influence of a curse, or the corruption of a dark god, or the twisting of a noble soul by war. But in the grim verses of Germanic legend, the most terrifying transformation was driven not by magic, but by grief. It was forged not in the heat of battle, but in the cold silence of a workshop. This is the story of the first true artist of revenge. It is the story of how Wayland the Smith, a craftsman whose hands could rival the gods, was dismantled by the cruelty of a petty king. It is a cautionary tale that echoes loudly in our understanding of the human spirit because it demonstrates a brutal psychological truth, that if you strip a man of his freedom, his dignity, and his body, the only thing left for him to craft is his own terrible justice. You do not need to kill a man to destroy him, but if you leave him his hands, you may find that he hammers out your doom. To understand how this tragedy unfolded, we must look at the world that Wayland inhabited. To the kings and warlords of the North, a master smith was more than a laborer. He was a strategic asset, a creator of swords that did not break and rings that held the power of sovereignty. King Nithother saw Wayland not as a man, but as a resource to be monopolized. But beneath the glimmer of the gold and the gems Wayland produced, a horrific crime was taking place. The king, fearful that his prize might flee, ordered Wayland hamstrung, his tendons severed, his legs useless, and imprisoned him on a lonely island. It was a prison of dazzling beauty and absolute agony. While the king's court wore the treasures of Wayland's labor, parading their wealth and power, the architect of that beauty dragged his crippled body across the floor of his forge. The king believed he had broken the smith, turning him into a living machine of production. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. He had forgotten that the same mind capable of designing the most intricate jewelry was also capable of designing the most intricate trap. And in the darkness of his island prison, Wayland stopped making treasures for the king and started making plans for his children. To truly grasp the darkness that eventually consumed Wayland, we must first understand the light that was stolen from him. The tragedy of the smith did not begin with his capture. It began with his heartbreak. In the oldest versions of the poem, the Verlandarkvida, Wayland was not born a captive. He was a free man living in the remote valleys of the north with his two brothers. It was there that they encountered three Valkyries, swan maidens, who had descended to earth to rest from their battles. For 7 years, Wayland lived in a fragile paradise, married to the Valkyrie Hervor. It was a time of peace, where his hammer rang out not for war, but for the creation of beautiful things for the woman he loved. But in the mythology of the North, happiness is rarely a permanent state. It is merely the calm before the winter. The call of battle was too strong for the swan maidens. In the 8th year, they felt the pull of their old lives. They took their feathered cloaks and flew away to the wars of men, leaving the brothers behind. Wayland's brothers, men of action, grabbed their spears and skied out into the snow to search for them. But Wayland, the man of focus, the man of obsession, stayed behind. He believed that if he could just craft the perfect ring, a ring so beautiful it surpassed the gods, his wife would return to him. He forged 700 rings of red gold, waiting in his empty hall, listening for the beat of swan wings that never came. This is the crucial context that King Nithother ignored. When his soldiers eventually raided the valley, they didn't just capture a smith. They captured a man who was already hollowed out by loss. They took a man who was waiting for love, and they put him in chains. Why did the king do it? Why risk the wrath of the gods to kidnap a single craftsman? To the modern observer, this might seem like a fairy tale villainy, but if we look through the lens of Iron Age economics, Nithother's actions were ruthlessly rational. In the migration period of Europe, a master smith was not simply a jeweler. He was the equivalent of a modern nuclear engineer or a defense contractor. In a world where survival depended on the sharpness of a blade and the durability of a shield, the smith held the keys to national security. A king with a mediocre army but excellent steel could conquer a kingdom. A king with brave soldiers but brittle iron would be erased from history. Wayland represented a monopoly on high-technology violence. By capturing him, King Nithother was engaging in industrial espionage and asset denial. He was ensuring that his soldiers would have the hardest edges and the strongest mail, while his neighbors would be left with soft iron. The brutality of hamstringing Wayland, severing the tendons behind the knee, was a standard, if gruesome, practice of the time for high-value slaves. It was a cold calculation. The king needed Wayland's hands, but he did not need his mobility. It was a way to ground a flight risk. The king looked at Wayland and saw a production facility that needed to be bolted to the floor. He treated a human being like a piece of capital equipment, failing to realize that unlike a machine, a human being remembers. We might be tempted to dismiss this narrative as mere folklore, a ghost story told around Viking campfires. But history has left us physical evidence that this story was central to the worldview of the ancient Germanic peoples. In the British Museum, there sits a small, intricate box carved from whalebone known as the Franks casket. It dates back to the 8th century, an era of Anglo-Saxon supremacy. On the front panel of this box, carved with painstaking detail, is a crime scene. On the left, we see a figure standing at an anvil. It is Wayland. He is visibly crippled, his legs bent at awkward angles. In one hand, he holds a pair of tongs gripping a human head over the forge. Beneath his feet, hidden in the clutter of the workshop, is the headless body of a man. And approaching him is a woman, the king's daughter, unsuspecting and carrying a broken ring. This carving is profound because it does not depict Wayland as a hero in shining armor. It depicts him as a grim operator in a slaughterhouse. The artist who carved this box over 1,000 years ago wanted us to see the gruesome reality of the Smith's revenge. It serves as a visual anchor for our story, proving that for the people of the Dark Ages, Wayland was as real and as terrifying as any king. He was the patron saint of the trapped, the god of the cornered animal. The opportunity for vengeance finally arrived, not with the clash of armies, but with the quiet greed of children. The king's 2 young sons, driven by the same avarice that possessed their father, snuck onto the island to gaze upon the smith's hoard. They saw the gold. Wayland saw the raw materials for his masterpiece. What followed was a dismantling of the monarchy far more intimate than any battlefield slaughter. Wayland murdered the boys, but he did not simply hide the evidence. He processed it. He treated the bodies of the princes with the same dispassionate skill he applied to silver and gold. In a macabre display of craftsmanship, he stripped the flesh from their heads and mounted their skulls in silver, fashioning them into drinking goblets for the king. He turned their teeth into beads and their eyes into jewels. It was a trap of supreme psychological horror. When the king and queen next sat at their high table, they were not just surrounded by the smith's work, they were consuming their own lineage. The king unknowingly drank from the death of his dynasty, praising the beauty of the vessel while swallowing the truth of his loss. But the architecture of Wayland's revenge required one final pillar. When the king's daughter, Berthvilder, came to the island in secret to repair a broken ring, Wayland completed his equation. He drugged her and violated her, ensuring that the heir to the throne would carry the blood of the man the king had tried to enslave. It was a cold, calculated exchange. The king had taken the use of Wayland's legs, so Wayland took the purity of the king's bloodline. He systematically deconstructed the king's future, piece by piece, turning the royal family into accessories for his escape. There is a striking parallel here to a myth from the warm waters of the Mediterranean, the story of Daedalus and Icarus. Like Wayland, Daedalus was a master craftsman imprisoned by a tyrant. Like Wayland, he crafted wings to escape. But the difference between the 2 stories reveals the fundamental difference between the Greek and the Germanic worldviews. The Greek myth is a tragedy of hubris. A father loses his son because they flew too close to the sun. It is a story about knowing your place. The story of Wayland is a horror story of hatred. Wayland does not lose his son. He destroys the sons of his enemy. His flight is not a majestic soar toward the heavens. It is a tactical retreat from a crime scene. Using wings crafted from feathers collected from birds he trapped on the island, the crippled man rose into the air. He did not fly silently away. He hovered over the palace walls, landing on the highest archway. He called out to the king below, forcing Nithother to listen. With the voice of a judge reading a sentence, Wayland explained exactly what the king was drinking from. He explained exactly whose child the princess was carrying. He made sure the king understood the full inventory of his loss. Only then, when the king was broken, weeping and helpless, did the smith fly away into the cold northern sky. Wayland disappeared from the island, but he did not disappear from history. In the centuries that followed, his name became a stamp of quality that echoed through the literature of the Middle Ages. In the Epic of Beowulf, when the hero prepares to fight the monster Grendel, he does not trust just any armor. He specifically boasts that his mail shirt is the work of Wayland. In the court of Charlemagne, the emperor's sword, Joyeuse, was said to be forged by Wayland. He became a phantom of the forge, a figure who existed outside of time. Whenever a hero needed a weapon that could kill a dragon or sever a destiny, they attributed it to Wayland. It is a strange legacy for a man who suffered so much, that his immortality comes from the instruments of death he left behind. He became the arms dealer of mythology, a reminder that behind every great hero's sword is a smith who hammered his own pain into the steel. Ultimately, the legend of Wayland the Smith is not merely a saga of blood and wings. It is a forensic accounting of the cost of dehumanization. The king sought to extract value from a human being without paying the price of respect. He tried to commodify talent while discarding the soul. And in doing so, he discovered that the most dangerous thing in the world is not a monster born, but a monster made. Wayland escaped his island, but the man he was before the hamstrings were cut never left that forge. He remains there in the cultural memory, a symbol of a dark equilibrium, that if you treat a man like a tool long enough, do not be surprised when he dismantles you with the precision of a master craftsman.